Hey everybody, this is Captain Chemo, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a panoramic photo like the one you see here. The reason I shoot and process panoramics is so I can get more image in my photo. So for instance, if I wanted to shoot this lighthouse and this sunrise with the sun rays here, it wouldn't be possible to get this in a single shot. Even with my wide angle, all I would be able to get is the lighthouse and basically this image here. So what I would need to do is shoot two more separate images, which would be this one for the center and this one here for the sun ray. And since we're doing HDR for this photo, I have to take 3 exposures for each one. So for the lighthouse photo on the left side, I would have to take 3 exposures. This is the even, this is the under, and this is the over. And for the center of the image, I would have to take another 3 set of exposures. This would be the even, the under, and the over. Same thing for the right side where the sun rays are. This is the even and the under and the over. And once I take those 3 photos, I go into Photomatix to create the HDR from each image. So this would be the lighthouse on the left side of our photo. This would be the center image, and this would be the right side where the sun rays are. And what we're going to do is we're going to take it into Photoshop to merge them all together or to stitch them together to create one solid image, which would be this image right here. And to finish this image off, we're going to take it into Lightroom, process for color, contrast, detail, and all that good stuff. Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to note that when I shot these 3 photos, I didn't use any special equipment to get the 3 shots. I just have my tripod and my regular tripod ball head where I spin around the camera on its axis to get 3 shots, one for the left, the center, and the right side. I also wanted to note that I will be showing you how to batch process in case you haven't done that before. I usually like using batch processing for a large number of shots. For instance, if I did a high quantity of shots for a very large panoramic, I would use batch processing. For this, something like this, I wouldn't normally do it, but for this tutorial, I'm just gonna go ahead and show you how to do that. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I have Photomatix open. Let's go ahead and load our first 3 set of exposures for our pano photo, and we're gonna tone map this image to get the HDR right first, and then we're gonna save the preset and use that preset to tone map the other 2 sets of exposures. So I'm just gonna go ahead and drag and drop the first 3 set into my Photomatix window. Hit OK here when that window pops up, and OK here. Align source, we don't need that. Remove ghosting, we won't. Actually, we're going to click remove ghosting because there is some movement in the waves. We'll let Photomatix take care of it automatically. I have detection set on high because of the waves. And reduce noise, we'll reduce noise and leave reduce chromatic aberration on, and click OK. Okay, so we're in our tone mapping window now. We have enhancer default selected. I'm going to go straight to enhancer grunge. We're going to start with that default. I'm going to close this window and make this a little bigger. And now I'm just going to start right down the row here and start tone mapping my image. It's a little intense with strength, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit, right around 80, just so that the sky isn't so dark, so muddy. You can see the difference if I pull it back. It's a little muddy, a little dark. You can see the little where the blue is. There's some black areas, and I don't really like that, especially in my blue sky, so I'm going to bring it down to about an 80, and you'll notice he'll sort of go away a little bit. Color saturation, I am going to bring that up. I'm going to increase it and get as much color as I can from this image. We're going to leave luminosity and detail contrast the way it is. I like the detail and the contrast, and the luminosity, so we're just going to leave that setting as is. Surreal, we'll see if I like it better, medium or surreal. I'll keep it surreal for lighting adjustments. Next we have more options here. We will leave the smooth highlights alone. Actually, we're going to give it just a 1. This is so I can use smooth shadows later on. So we'll just add 1 here. The next slider is white point, and we're just going to maybe bring it down some. It's a little bright, so I'm just gonna bring it down to about a 0.9. And we have black point where I'm gonna want a little black point. You can see right in here it's a little faded, the where the lighthouse is painted in black. You can tell here it's not as dark as I'd like, so I'm gonna crank up the black point just a little bit here, and that looks pretty good. So let's go to the next slider, which is gamma, and I'm gonna play around with it and see if I like it brighter or darker. If I bring it to the left, it'll be a little darker, add a little more contrast to my image. So I kind of do like it a little darker, so I'm gonna just put it around 80.85. And then we're gonna go to the next slider, which is temperature. Temperature we will leave as is, since I kind of like the temperature the way it was, so we're just gonna leave that at 0. So let's move down to our next slider, which is micro smoothing. Micro smoothing, if you bring it all the way to the right, it'll smooth out your image. You'll lose detail and contrast. For this image, I'm going to keep it all the way to the left to maintain all that detail and contrast. Next is saturation highlight and saturation shadows. These sliders I rarely touch, so we're going to leave these two alone. And then we'll move to shadow smoothness. Now with shadow smoothness, it will smoothen out the shadows, which is right around the foreground area, and that would be our water. And if I were to bring it up, it'll darken our water and it'll make it look a little more natural. But I kind of like it a little brighter, so I'm going to bring it right back to about a 20, and it looks good there. I'm going to leave it there. The last slider is shadows clipping. We don't need to worry about that since I never use it, so let's go ahead and finish up here. We're done tone mapping this particular photo. We're gonna save the preset here. This is so that we can use it for the next two set of exposures. I'm just gonna save it Pano, and then we can go back into the preset here, select the Pano preset, which is right here, and click on it, and it will give us our tone map setting. So let's go ahead and process this photo. Click the process button. Once you have your photo processed, don't even worry about saving it. I'm just gonna go ahead and close it out. All we needed to do was create a preset and save that preset so we can start batch processing our photos. Okay, so let's batch process our photos. Normally I don't batch process 3 sets of exposures. I usually just do that manually or one at a time. But if I have more than 3 sets, I'll use the batch processing option in Photomatix. So to access batch processing, you click on the batch bracketed photos button here. You get this window that pops up. In the settings here, you want to go into here, and then this is where you get your ghosting option. We will remove ghost, have detection on high, and we will leave reduce noise on, and then we'll reduce chromatic aberration, and the rest we'll just leave as is and hit OK. Next is tone map with detail enhancer. Now this is we use detail enhancer in our last set of exposures where we tone map, where we save the setting there, and we're gonna go back and select the setting in the presets here. We're just gonna click on the preset and look for that setting, which is the Pano setting. We'll click on that, and then it'll load all the settings from that preset. Click OK. Next we'll skip everything and move all the way to the bottom where we go to the source, where we want to select our folder or our directory where all our exposures that we want to create HDR images from. We want to select that folder. Our next option is to select where you want all your HDR images saved to, and I usually like to just save it right into the folder where all the exposures in. So we'll leave this right here checked, created in source folder. We'll leave that the way it is, and that is pretty much it. Once you have that done, you click the run button here, and then it'll start loading all the exposures and processing all the images in the source folder here. Okay, so once Photomatix is done processing all the photos, you'll get the batch successfully completed message here, and then it'll give you a little link to the directory that I created where it put all the HDR images. So you can click on that, and then all your HDR images will pop up here. So let's take a look at it. Alright, so this is our first image in our Pano, the left side of the Pano, and this is the center image to our Pano, and this is the right side of our Pano, and they all look pretty good. So we're gonna go ahead and close this out and just go ahead and close that window out. And then let's go ahead and open all three exposures in Photoshop Elements, and I'll show you how to stitch it all together there. So here I have Photoshop Elements open with all three photos loaded, and you can see this is the left side of the panel, this is the center of the panel, and this is the right side of the panel. So we're going to create a panoramic image out of all three photos in Photoshop Elements. But before I begin, I wanted to note that Photoshop Elements is limited to certain things. So I'm only going to show you how to stitch together the image in Photoshop Elements. And all other post-processing will be done in Photoshop CS. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into File, go into New, and Photo Merge Panorama. Click on that and you'll get a new window here. This window will let you select your photos that you want to use to create your panorama. Now you can browse to the file or you can add open files, and what I'm going to do is add open files. You can see here it added the files in this list here. Now we're going to go into layout. I'm going to leave it on auto, but if auto doesn't work for you, you can select different types of methods for Photoshop Elements to create your pano. Next, make sure you have blend images together checked. You don't need to worry about vignette removal, and you can leave geometric distortion correction unchecked. Now just click the OK button and let Photoshop Elements do its thing. Once it's done, you'll notice that Photoshop Elements did a pretty good job creating a pano of this photo. The only problem with this pano is, most of you probably noticed, is this curvature. Now in Photoshop Elements, there's really no way to fix this. I'm sure you can figure it out, but I haven't had time to figure it out. If I ever do figure it out, I will let you know. And this is where this section of the video stops, and now I'll take you into Photoshop CS and show you how to actually stitch and create a panel there. It is a little different, but over there in Photoshop CS we'll also be able to fix this curvature here. Okay, so I have Photoshop CS4 open, and I have all three of my photos open for the pano. This is the first image on the left, this is the center, and this is the right side. And we're going to go into File here and Automate, so it's a little different than Photoshop Elements, and go into Photo Merge. Once you click that, the window for creating the panel should pop up. Notice how similar the Photo Merge window is to Photoshop Elements, and we will hit Add Open Files because all our panel images are already open, so click on that and it should add it to the list. We'll leave the option Auto checked and check blend images together. We'll leave the next two options unchecked, vignette removal and geometric distortion correction. We'll leave that unchecked and click OK. Now we just wait for Photoshop to stitch the photos together. Okay, so once Photoshop is done stitching together our panoramic, I'm going to go ahead and flatten the image. I'm going to go to layers and just flatten the whole file down. And next we're going to crop it. I'm going to use the crop tool here just to crop out the excess image, and we're just going to go ahead and crop it right around there. And right there, now it looks good. Now we still have the curvature, but here in Photoshop CS I will show you how to fix that. Okay, so once we flatten the image, the next thing we'll do is we'll duplicate the background layer. So I hit Control J. It's Command J on a Mac, and we're going to transform this using the transform tool. But before we do that, let's go ahead and show the ruler. Control R will show the ruler, Command R on a Mac will show the ruler, and what we'll do is we'll click on the rule up here and just drag a guideline out and just set it right around the where the horizon is. And you can see here that the horizon isn't quite equal to each other, so we're gonna go Control T or Command T on a Mac to get our transform points out, so we can rotate it a tad bit so that the horizon lines are kind of equal. Right, so once we do that, just hit enter, and now the horizon is a little closer to each other. And next, to get this curvature in the horizon to look straight, we are going to go into the warp tool. Alright, so to get to the warp tool, we'll go into edit, transform, and warp. So once you do that, you get kind of a grid here that where you can manipulate the photo. So we'll just click right in the center here and just kind of pull down the horizon line so that it's straight. You can see now that the horizon is nice and flat. We just hit the enter button, and now we have our straight horizon. Okay, so now that our horizon is straightened, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fix this blown out area here. I like to keep my white points not completely white, but have some color in the bright areas. So before we do that, we're going to go into the layers and we're going to flatten this image so it'll flatten the image together. together. And then I'm going to duplicate that image so I can show you the before and after. And then we're going to zoom in here, and to paint this white area, what we need to do is use the eyedropper tool right here. Click on that and sample a color around the white area here. So I'm going to sample the color right here, and that will change your foreground color, which is right here, to that color that you just sampled. So now we're going to use the paintbrush tool and make sure it's around 5 or 10%. We're going to go 5%, and then we're just going to start painting around this area here just to kind of dull the color down so it's not so bright. And if you want to change the color, we'll just use the eyedropper tool again, and we're going to sample around this area, which would be right around there, and go into the paintbrush tool and just start painting around that area also. And then let's zoom out a little bit and see where else we might want to paint in, anywhere where it seems to be a little blown out. I might want to paint right around there, so I'm going to use the eyedropper tool here a little bit, and then I'm going to just paint around here also, maybe around here as well. So let's go ahead and zoom out on it, and then let's see the before here and the after. Let's go in a little closer so you can see the before and the after. So it's not a big difference, but when we go to process in Lightroom, it'll help so that it won't look completely blown out when we start playing around with the highlights. Alright, so now that we're done here, let's go ahead and just save the file. I like to save it as a Photoshop file, and then take that file into Lightroom and adjust all the color and the details and contrast and all that stuff. I like to do it all in Lightroom. Okay, so I have our photo open in Lightroom, and we are in the develop module, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the effects, add just a little bit of a vignette to the image, just a little bit, and once I do that, I'm going to begin to start post-processing the image. And I start from basic, so let's go ahead and open the basic window here and just play around with the temperature and the tint to where I think looks good. And then I might want to drop the exposure down just a little. Recovery light, I'm going to pull that up, and what that does is fill in the highlights a little bit so it doesn't make the highlights as bright. And then I'm going to bring out the fill color just a little bit here, and just brightens everything up a little bit, including the shadows. And the black, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to darken it. I'm going to darken it with contrast a little bit, but before I do that, I'm going to just brighten it up just a little, and then add a bit of contrast to the image. And with clarity, I'm going to bring the clarity up just to really make the image stand out a tad. And with vibrance, I'm going to add some vibrance in it, give it some more color pop, and we're going to leave saturation alone. And we're done in basics here, so I'm going to close that window out. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the gradient tool here, and I'm going to drag a gradient right on top of the sky here, and maybe add a slight bit of a hint of color, a hint of a blue there. Let me play around with that until I kind of get that tint I want, and I think it's right about there. So I'll close that out. You can use the tint that you like. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the exposure a little bit, maybe bring it down a tad, and then bring down the clarity just to kind of soften the clouds up there a little bit. Next, we're going to close this out, and then you know what? I'm going to add another gradient here down below here, just to kind of darken up the bottom a little bit to draw the eye towards the center of the photo. And I might want to add a bit of a tint of a color here too. So play around with that, see which color fits best for this. And that looks good. So I'm going to close that out and play with the settings a little until I get exactly where I want. Also bring down the clarity here, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to click done. Next, it looks like I want to add an overall golden hue to the whole entire image, so I'm going to go into split toning, and I'm going to use the highlights. I'm going to click on that and just add a little bit of a golden color there, and it kind of gives it a little bit of a more of a warm feel. You can tone it down by using the saturation. You can bring it down just to kind of tone down the gold light here. So I'm going to drop it right around 30, which looks pretty good. Once I'm done with that, I am going to go ahead and close this out and then play with the tonal curves just a little bit. And that looks good. Next, I'm going to want to brighten this area up a little bit, just this specific area. So what I'm going to use for that is I'm going to use the brush tool here, and then we're just going to create a brush stroke right around this area here, around the rays. We're going to make those rays really pop out a little bit. So once I do that, I'm going to give it a little bit of a tint of a color, golden color here. Now it's just much brighter, so I'm going to darken it just a tad and then maybe add a little bit of contrast, and then I'm going to bring down the clarity and soften that whole area up. I don't want it too vibrant, so let's go ahead and zoom out on it and click done first. So let's go ahead and zoom out on that, and that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and go see the before and after. So this was before and this is after. I'm liking this image the way it is. I mean, you can keep on processing it, but I do see one thing over here which is a little dust speck, and I'm just going to go ahead and fix that with this spot removal tool. Let's click on that and maybe just click on it, and it should pick a decent area for it to clone in there. So let's go ahead and hit done, and it looks good there. So let's go ahead and go back out. Well, that's it for this tutorial. Let's go ahead and go over everything we just did. Alright, so let's recap what we just did. To create a panoramic image of this lighthouse, I took a total of 9 exposure, 3 for the left, these 3 here for the left, and then these 3 for the center image, and the last 3 for the right side of the image. And this was all taken for HDR, to tone map in Photomatix to get these images here. This is the left HDR image, this is the center HDR image, and this is the right side of the HDR image. Now we took all 3 of those HDR image and took them into Photoshop and stitched them together to create this one pano. And once we got done creating the pano, we took it into Lightroom to get our final image, where we use Lightroom to process for color, detail, and contrast. Well, that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully I'll have another one available for next month. Until next time, this is Captain Chemo signing out.